Hello there, welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm John, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the field guide to Hot Springs Island. So before we start, a little bit of a disclaimer. This is not a review of either of the Hot Springs Islands books. However, it's a book that I'm thinking of using for a mini convention I'm going to, as you'll know if you've listened to previous episodes, and also potentially as a second bi-weekly campaign at some nebulous point in the future. So I wanted to talk about one of the things that attracted me specifically to this set of books. If you're interested in checking them out yourself, you can go to shop.swordfishislands.com/books. And the two books in question are A Field Guide to Hot Springs Island and The Dock of Hot Springs Island. You get a PDF with them as well. However, I will point out these books are not cheap. The Field Guide, which is sort of an in-game prop that we're going to be talking about specifically in this episode, is at the time of recording $40 US, and The Dock of Hot Springs Island, which is like the GM book with all the secrets and everything in it, is $60 US at the time of recording. So it's not cheap. However, the production values are absolutely amazing on it, and it really captured my imagination when I splurged out and purchased it. So if you've got the readies, I really do recommend it. And like I say, this isn't a review, but I do recommend it. It's a great book and one I've been dying to run for absolutely ages. So why am I talking specifically about the field guide to Hot Springs Island? And what is the field guide before we get into it? Well, the field guide is sort of an in-character prop that can be handed out to the players. And it's part sort of notebook, part journal, part player map, all wrapped up into a very nice, professionally produced, neat little package. Now, the central conceit of the Hot Springs Islands sort of campaign book is that there's this island that you have been sent to on behalf of a mercantile company to attempt to plumb the riches and gain resources on this island, running into various strange creatures, factions, and groups with their own interests and their own sort of ongoing stories while you're on the island. And it's implied that there have been previous explorers and expeditions to the island, and the field guide is basically the journal of one of these previous expeditions. The introduction is signed Zilby Bentgrass, and it says, fewer than 100 of the adventurers recruited to explore Hot Springs Island have made it back to us in one piece. However, every man and woman savvy enough to stay alive has returned with bags of treasure and a whole bard's worth of stories. They spoke of steaming jungles filled with magical plants, lost ruins, ravenous creatures, and vengeful feuding factions. We compiled their first-hand accounts, polished them off with a bit of wild assumption, and wrote it all down in this book, A Field Guide to Hot Springs Island, for people like you. So, obviously you're being sent there in the hope that, you'll come back with fantabulous riches and more information for this mercantile company. So why do I think this is such a great thing? Well, normally I'm not really a fan of having loads of homework that the player characters have to do during a session. But the way this book is organised, effectively each double page spread is about one aspect of the island, whether that be the Chachuga pepper, the cave lily, all the way up to giant rats, poisoned dart frogs, and specific areas like White Watch Springs. They have some lovely, sketchy sort of black and white art, which works really well for the idea of it being a sort of journal and compiled from second-hand accounts. But I like the fact they establish very early on in the introduction that these are somewhat potentially unreliable accounts. So the players can't rely 100% on what's in here, but they've at least got something to be going on. It also solves a perennial problem, or I suppose not a problem, but a question I often see asked when people are talking about D&D, when people will say, what do I do if my players have read the monster manual back and forth? It's very difficult to know how much you know in character. Well, most of the monsters of Hot Springs Island, which are obviously covered from the GM's perspective in the Dock of Hot Springs Island, have their own little unique flavour or twist on them. However, you can hand the player characters this field guide and say, anything in here you know or you suspect, and then they can find their own way. So if you want to know, like, oh, what's going on with the Vidorak swarmer, these grapefruit-sized desert scarab-like beetles, you can quickly flip to this page, and you've got a little thing where it says their size, their diet, their society, habitat, where they tend to live, how they sort of work in combat, if there are any useful biological parts on them, and any odd unverified rumours that might have been heard. And you get a bit of a quote thrown in as well, which says, first you see just one, then you see five, then you don't see the bard no more. And I love this because, and hence me doing the sort of faux pirate voice there, because it really does remind me of those sort of like piratical and bardic tales. Effectively, you're reading someone else's blown up and exaggerated account of their adventures on Hot Springs Island that serve as a springboard, no pun intended, for your own adventures on the island. And like I say, it's not a book you have to digest all in one, so it's not like it's a lot of homework, but there's a nice index at the start and a contents page. So if you want to find something, you can very easily flip to it. And because all of the sections have like nice big titles on and very distinctive images, and they tend to be sort of like 2-page spreads in the main, it's not difficult to flick through the various sections and find what you're looking for. But there's no real game information in terms of the actual like systems in here. It's effectively all just flavor text. And one of the ideas that they sort of proffer in this sort of set of books is that players should make their own written observations and stuff like that in this, like a journal, so sort of filling it up as they go along and, you know, adding their own notes to it. Now, to be honest, I love that as an idea, and there's even a sort of map of the island at the start with a partially filled in key to various areas next to it that you would be able to write your own notes in. However, this bad boy does cost like $40, so I'm not really sure I'd be up for handing over my nice spanking looking copy to the player characters for them to scribble on. However, you do get the PDF with it, so I could see myself like printing out and binding up a copy, which would also allow me to, like, you know, tear it up a bit, make it look a little bit more lived in, so to speak. I could also smudge some of the writing, omit some of the pages like they've been torn out or stuff like that. You know, really go to town and make it sort of like an in-game artifact, which I think would add a tremendous amount of flavour and interest to your game. Obviously, this is a bit more difficult to do in like a VTT, which is how I tend to primarily run my games nowadays. But, you know, I could scan the pages and have sort of selected ones of them available on notes. Maybe like not even have the player characters start with this. Maybe they find like a partial version of it and they're trying to find the missing pages of the book. The possibilities of this prop, and I love props anyway, are virtually limitless, and it really does add an awful lot to a game. And I love the idea of, so I'm not generally a big fan of flavor text in sort of rule books. I'm like, don't be filling up my rule books with like your sort of stories and your in-game fiction. I want the rules, I want the background, I want the stuff that's going to help me running the game, not the fiction. However, having it separated out like this in a way that makes sense within the framework of the adventure and as a separate little thing to the GM book, The Dark of Hot Springs Island, I think is a really clever idea. To be honest, I just wish they did like a budget sort of like hard copy of it, rather than, don't get me wrong, this is beautiful. It has a wicked Warhammer-esque looking Chaos Skull on the front cover, which according to this, I'm guessing was illustrated by Gabriel Hernandez, since they're the only person listed as an illustrator. But it is $40, which isn't cheap. I don't regret buying it, but by the same token, for something that's going to be written in, I'd love there to be like a stingy gamer version that, you know, I could just buy like half a dozen of on the cheap and like dole out to players. But as I've said, I can print out my own. But I really love this idea of having a handout that can be given to the player characters, and it's one of the things that sort of grabbed me about the setting. I ended up ordering both the books together because I love the idea of a sort of island crawl, you know, in the style of the Isle of Dread module. The actual Dark of Hot Springs Isle book is absolutely great. Obviously, I'm not going to go into extensive detail about that because this isn't a review, but I really love the whole package, and it really did grab my imagination. As I say, I've been dying to run it for ages, and I've once again been bitten by the bug where I'm like, well, I only run a game every other Friday. I could slide in another game on alternating Fridays, especially Hot Springs Island. Well, it's an island. I could drop it into my existing campaign world. I wouldn't need to create a new campaign world, and I wouldn't really need much planning because I know that I've got the books here with everything in, and I know there's some very cool online sort of generators and randomizers that help you run this setting, this sort of mini campaign. So I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I could fit that in. That wouldn't cause me like GM burnout or anything like that. So I'm steadily, as is on my want, after so long just running one game every other week, I'm now sort of trying to scratch that weekly gaming itch by potentially, and it's not definite yet, by potentially bringing in a Hot Springs Island campaign, probably using old school essentials if I run it, because I love me some old school essentials. Speaking of which, there's a Kickstarter going for that at the minute, so if you're interested in that, check that out on Kickstarter. But I would love to know if any of you guys out there have actually run Hot Springs Island, because I've purchased it but not got around to running it yet. I've never played in a game of it. I've heard lots of people who own it, but I've never heard of anyone actually really running it in my immediate circles. And I'd love to get a bit more feedback and hear some stories of how people ran their own little island crawls using Hot Springs Island. Any tips, any tricks, any things to avoid. So if you do want to call in, please do. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can get in touch with us a couple of different ways, and that is by leaving a voicemail on SpeakPipe or Anchor. Links in the description down below. Or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. We publish the voicemails in podcast episodes, not on YouTube at the moment. Although if you want that to change, let us know. If there's enough demand, we'll do it. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff that YouTubers and podcasters ask you to do. Hope you've enjoyed this little mini episode of me gushing about Hot Springs Island, and I'm sure I'll circle around to talking a bit more about it again in the future. Almost definitely if I do end up actually running it. So until we catch you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.